How does a brigade of nearly 3,000 men survive for 3 days in the heart of the Libyan desert without a single drop of water? Not when they are on the move, but when they are pinned down, surrounded, and fighting for their lives under a blazing sun that pushes temperatures past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the story of the 7th Motor Brigade, part of the famed Desert Rats, in the summer of 1942. It is a story of ingenuity, sheer willpower, and a desperate gamble against an enemy that had them beaten until the desert itself intervened. To understand their predicament, we have to look at the strategic situation in late May of 1942. General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, had launched a sweeping offensive against the British 8th Army's Gazala line. His goal was to hook around the southern flank, smash the British armor, and capture the vital port of Tobruk. Holding that southern flank near a barren, windswept crossroads called Bir Hachaim was the 1st Free French Brigade. But arrayed behind them, ready to meet the German armor when it swept around, was the 7th Armored Division. Within that division, the 7th Motor Brigade, commanded by Brigadier George Davey, was a key component. These were not infantrymen who dug trenches. They were mobile troops equipped with trucks and light armor, trained to move fast and hit hard. Their brigade was composed of the 2nd Battalion, the Rifle Brigade, and the 2nd and 9th, battalions of the King's Royal Rifle Corps. By the 27th of May, Rommel's panzers had made their move. They swept past Bir Hachaim, intending to drive east into the rear echelons of the British Army, but they hadn't counted on the 7th Motor Brigade, which was sitting right in their path. At dawn on May 27th, the men of the Rifle Brigade saw the horizon to their west turn black. It was not a rain cloud. It was dust, the dust of hundreds of vehicles. The 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions, along with the Italian Ariete Armored Division, were bearing down on their position. The fighting that erupted was chaotic and brutal. The 7th Motor Brigade was outnumbered and outgunned. They had no heavy tanks to match the Panzer IIIs and IVs. What they had were 57mm anti-tank guns, their personal rifles, and a grim determination. By 0900 hours, the Ariete Division had overrun the 3rd Indian Motor Brigade to their south. By 1100, the 8th Hussars, the armored regiment supporting them, had been virtually wiped out, losing over 50 tanks in a furious engagement. The Motor Brigade was being squeezed. They fought a desperate delaying action, falling back from one position to the next. But Rommel's forces were too fast. By the afternoon of the 27th, the 7th Motor Brigade found itself cut off. They were isolated in a defensive box, a perimeter of rifle pits and anti-tank guns, with the entire Afrika Korps swirling around them. They had done their job. They had disrupted Rommel's timetable, but now they were trapped, nearly 30 miles behind enemy lines. And that was when the second enemy arrived, the sun. By the second day, May 28th, the crisis was no longer the German tanks. It was water. The heat was relentless, a dry, oppressive force that sapped the strength from a man with every breath. Water rations were cut to a pint per man, then half a pint. Men licked the condensation from the sides of their vehicles in the early morning. By the 29th, the situation was impossible. The brigade's water trucks had been destroyed in the initial assault. The few remaining water cans were empty. Men sat in the shade of their trucks, unable to speak, their tongues swollen, their lips cracked and bleeding. They were surrounded by Rommel's panzer divisions, and they were slowly being cooked to death. Pause. It was, by all accounts, the end. But the desert is a fickle place. Little did the men of the 7th Motor Brigade know that salvation was coming from an unlikely source, the sky. On the afternoon of May 29th, Brigadier Davey received a faint radio message. It was garbled, but the gist was clear. A relief column was trying to break through. But as the sun began its slow descent, the horizon didn't fill with British tanks. Instead, the air began to change. The temperature started to drop. The wind picked up. First, it was a gentle breeze, a relief from the stifling heat. But within minutes, it turned violent. The sky, once a cruel, clear blue, turned a menacing shade of brown, then black. A Kamsin, a ferocious desert sandstorm, was rolling directly over the battlefield. For Rommel's panzers, it was an annoyance, blinding their reconnaissance planes and grinding their advance to a halt. For the 7th Motor Brigade, It was a gift from God. The wind howled at over 70 miles an hour. Sand stung the skin and made it impossible to see more than a few feet, but it also provided the cover they needed. Brigadier Davy gave the order. Under the cover of the screaming storm, the men abandoned their useless vehicles. They formed up in single file, each man holding the webbing of the man in front of him so as not to get lost. For 3 hours, they stumbled eastward, through the very heart of the German positions, completely invisible in the swirling chaos. For Rommel's panzers, it was an annoyance, blinding their reconnaissance planes and grinding their advance to a halt. For the 7th Motor Brigade, it was a gift from God. The wind howled at over 70 miles an hour. Sand stung the skin and made it impossible to see more than a few feet, but it also provided the cover they needed. Brigadier Davy gave the order. Under the cover of the screaming storm, the men abandoned their useless vehicles. They formed up in single file, each man holding the webbing of the man in front of him so as not to get lost. For 3 hours, they stumbled eastward, through the very heart of the German positions, completely invisible in the swirling chaos.